Welcome back. Thanks, everyone, for coming back. A couple new faces, or yeah, welcome. So my name is Raquel DeHoyos. This is week 3 of our class called Nourished. My apologies. I had some music just so we could get jiving here, but I'm going to turn that down so you can actually hear me. And today we're going to be working on a delicious recipe, which is a roasted tomato soup. And it's perfect soup weather, so I hope you guys like this recipe. But we're also going to be talking about a specific area of our body because we've been focusing on specific areas, and today is the lungs. So again, this class is all about how do we keep ourselves nourished, obviously through nutrition, but also taking a look at some of the key factors that can help keep us nourished during times of illness, recovery, chronic pain issues that we might be dealing with, and looking at some of these key organs in our body, but also looking at some of the other emotional aspects of like how do we keep ourselves positive and engaged through our health journey. So this week it's all about the lungs. But the soup recipe that we have for you, it's a quick, easy one. It's one of my favorites and one that I've made quite often for myself, for other people that I've cooked for, because one of the things I like about it is soup is always one of those favorite comfort foods, right? If you think about any time that you're sick, what's the common thing that people tell you to eat? Chicken soup, right? I should have done a recipe for that too, but tomato is my favorite. Because I also think about like tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches on a cold, drizzly day, right? So I made this a recipe, but what I like about it is that it's very simple, but it also uses some very basic ingredients that I like to kind of just douse with some really great flavor. And you can do that in a couple ways through some of the seasonings and spices that we're going to use, but also through the cooking technique. So because we're recording and because of the power of like magic of television, as they say, I've got a batch warming on the burner back there that you all will get to try, but I want to walk you through the steps of it because it is really easy. And one thing about it is dairy free. So for many people who have issues, with dairy or lactose intolerant, sometimes you'll go to a restaurant and you'll buy a can of soup at the store and it has milk or cream in it, and that's what also makes it delicious, right? Or butter or things like that. A lot of times people can't tolerate that. So this one is completely dairy free, which I love. And it starts with just tomatoes, and you could use any kind. These are the vine ripe tomatoes that you see at the grocery store. And I always joke, I used to work in restaurants and we would have like the produce vendors come in and say, oh no, yeah, those tomatoes, they're so, they hold so well, they're like, if you were to bounce them off the wall, they'd be like a baseball because they're usually so firm. It's like, then they're not really quite, they're not quite really ripe. But that's a lot of what you see in the grocery store, right? Because we have to kind of have these types of ingredients available year round. And so the way that we keep them is to usually see them under ripened, and then you can take them home and let them ripen a little bit on a counter. I did a bad thing. Well, not a bad thing, but these were in my cooler bag. And one thing I always recommend with tomatoes is that you don't put them in the refrigerator because it just affects the taste. And some would often say too, like it breaks down the sugars and you don't get quite the same taste from the tomato. But so what I typically tend to do is I'll buy, these are pretty firm, and just leave them on my counter for a few days. But they still kind of lack some flavor, right? They're kind of flavorless. If you've ever had a garden or you've tasted beautiful tomatoes that somebody has grown, it's a totally different taste. But we work with what we have, right? So what I wanted to show you is how to make this delicious soup because it's going to kind of blow your mind. It's a delicious soup that just has some very simple flavors. And what I tend to do with my with these tomatoes is I want to keep it very simple. So I just cut them in big slices, almost like, what you might cut for a sandwich or something, but maybe a little bit bigger than that. So maybe like an inch. And I put them on a foil lined baking sheet. And we're going to add a couple other things to that baking sheet. But let me cut up these tomatoes so you can just see. I kind of like doing this recipe also because it really is like scratch cooking, but like 101. This is something that will not take very long to make. And then you come up with something that looks like you could have had it at a restaurant and you can impress your family and friends. So this is, excuse me, 3 pounds of tomatoes. And that's about maybe 6 to 8 tomatoes, depending on the size. And I just put them here on my baking sheet. And I love keeping everything in there. The seeds, don't worry about that. It is allergy season, isn't it? I keep having this scratchy throat, and no amount of water is helping. But I'm gonna work through it. So, tomato seeds are great, and tomatoes are wonderful for us for many reasons, and great for lung health. But the tomato seeds add flavor. There's some sweetness in there, regardless of how ripe the tomato is. The sweetness is also coming from the seeds of the tomato. But when it comes to tomatoes, there is something called lycopene in it, which is really great for our lung health because you know how we were talking about last week, inflammation in the body, and that putting a strain on organs like our heart. It can also put a strain on all sorts of organs, including our lungs. And so lycopene does a good job. It's also what makes fruits and vegetables have that beautiful color. So it's like the red in tomatoes, the orange in carrots, things like that. But it's really good for lung health because it helps with inflammation. Okay, so we've got our tomatoes there. The other thing I'm going to add, this is kind of the secret ingredient. So the tomatoes have some natural sweetness, but the bell peppers also bring in some sweetness. And I'm using 2 kind of good size bell peppers. And I'm just going to show you, I don't know if I showed you this last time when I had another pepper recipe, but this is how I like to cut my red bell peppers. I take the top and the bottom off, and we're not going to throw anything away except for this little stem piece. But you're going to toss that on there as well. And if you have a pretty good size baking sheet, I would recommend using that just so that you can get everything on there. But what I do is I slowly just take my knife and cut through some of these veins and then the seed. And when I get to the end, it's a pretty cool party trick, right? When I get to the end, I just sort of push my knife down, and there you go. All you have to do is just pull out maybe a little bit of this. But that is a great way to cut through. I know sometimes people will just maybe cut the top and pull the seeds out. You could do that as well, but this is kind of a fun way to do it, and it gets you what you need, right? So we're going to keep it in bigger chunks, and that's kind of the goal. So what we're going to do, you can pretend that we're going to put this in on the baking sheet. We're going to roast it essentially under the broiler for about 20-25 minutes until everything browns. But I just kind of wanted to walk you through what that looks like and how simple it is, really. Shouldn't take you that long. Sometimes when I'm making a tomato soup, I may also add in some canned tomatoes. I was reading this morning, actually, that canned or cooked tomatoes have even more lycopene and great health properties when they're cooked. So, we're making a tomato soup. That's even better bargain for us, right? Because we're cooking it, but canned tomatoes will work just as well. Sometimes they're a little more tangy or acidic, and so you might have seen recipes, especially in Italian cooking, where they add a little pinch of sugar. That's to help sort of balance out that acidity. We actually want to keep that in this soup, and we're going to be adding another ingredient that's going to bring out a little bit more acidity to balance this, but the sweetness instead of the sugar is going to come from the red bell peppers. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to add here is just a sweet yellow onion. These are some of my favorite onions to use because they've got great flavor, and when you cook them, a lot of those natural sugars come out and just caramelize and get all delicious. So this is how I cut an onion. I've cut many in my cooking career. People do it all sorts of ways. You could go like this and cut it in half and peel it, just like that, right? And I often say don't discard anything, because you can use, especially with onions like this, you can use that for like a stock that you might want to make later. So I just kind of take the peel off and any of that just really fine peel that's attached. And I don't want to completely cut through the root because I want to keep it intact, but I essentially want to get just some big chunks out of the onion as well. And we're just going to do this. So everything is about, the same size, right? You're just putting it all on this baking sheet like so. You can take some of these pieces apart, and all of these flavors are just going to cook together. And the other thing that's going to happen is they're going to release their juices, and you're going to use that as well. So there's no additional water, there's no additional vegetable stock that you need to add to this. That's also what makes this kind of like almost a pretend cream-based soup, but it's really just you're concentrating the vegetables or the fruits all together in the blender, and that's going to do the work for you. Okay. So let me just clean up my cutting board here. Some of the flavors that we're going to add now, very simple, to our pan is, okay, so we have a little bit of Italian seasoning. Sometimes you may cook a recipe and you end up with extra spices, right? This one is great because it has a blend of things. So it might have like oregano, thyme, basil, but you could use whatever. I just kind of tend to marry my spices with the ingredients and sort of what I'm making. So this is sort of a kind of Italian themed soup, I guess. And so I'm using just a tablespoon of dried Italian herbs. But when I cook, you all know, I love to use fresh herbs as well. So in addition to a tablespoon of dried herbs going on here, at the end when we blend the soup, it will use just maybe about one small little package of fresh basil. So it's essentially a tomato basil soup, but it's kind of muted because you've got all these other great flavors, but there are some fresh herbs that kind of get added into there to add more flavor. The other thing we're going to add is 3 tablespoons of olive oil. And olive oil is definitely great for us because who remembers what type of fat does it have in it that is really good for us? We talked about it, I think, once or twice now. Starts with an O. The omega-3s, yeah. So that's also great, again, great source of fat. One thing I forgot to mention about our red bell peppers, as I was showing you that cool trick. So red bell peppers are part of, and tomatoes actually, they have great vitamin C, but there was something else I wanted to mention. So they have great antioxidant properties, and they can help reduce lung inflammation and promote just better lung health. They're a great source of vitamin C. Both of these are part of the nightshade family. So I always like to tell people that too, because sometimes people will eat tomatoes and say, I don't know why my stomach feels upset. So if you've ever heard of different types of ingredients being part of the nightshade family, those are things like tomatoes, red bell peppers, tomatillos are included in their potatoes, eggplant. They're all delicious foods, often found in like the Mediterranean diet, but some people have sensitivities to those. And so if you are noticing things like some stomach distress or even some respiratory distress, it could be from some of those things like the nightshade ingredients, but typically most people tolerate them pretty well. Okay, the other thing that we're going to add is just a little bit of simple seasoning here. So it's 1 teaspoon of salt and then 1 teaspoon of black pepper. And so we just do a little sprinkle like that. Yep, it's just regular salt. Extra virgin olive oil. You could, there's, I was just visiting that cute little town Green last weekend with my mother, and there's a store there that has all of those oils that you can sample, and I was thinking of you all because I keep telling you should go check out those places. So so they had all these beautiful oils and vinegars, and yeah, any one of those would be great. They make so many different kinds, you could do that. So what I want to do is just kind of, this is how I do it at home. Just get all of that oil dispersed, all the herbs. And like I said, we're going to broil this under the broiler for about 20-25 minutes. I like to turn the pan about halfway through, but so for the sake of this, I just kind of piled it all on here. You can do that. It's going to tend to steam a little bit more, but what you want to have happen too, if you have a larger baking sheet and you can spread them out in a single layer, is make sure that you have them kind of spread out so that, and these pieces kind of the cut side down, just so that you get more of that beautiful browning and charring color on them. But this is basically what it's going to look like. So it already smells delicious. I'm going to keep talking because I don't see Jose to give out our samples just yet, but that's okay. We're going to pretend like we put this in the oven. But there's a couple of things I'll talk to you about that we're going to add. So once this comes out of the oven, I let it cool just for a few minutes. And like I said, rotate the pan about halfway through, 20, 25 minutes or so. Some people's broilers tend to run a little hot, so you can have them maybe at 500. I've seen some that go up to 525, 550. Be very careful. Keep an eye on that. I have a very small apartment, so every time I turn on the broiler, it thinks I'm having a fire, and so the little smoke detector goes off. But yeah, so once that's, you don't have to let it completely cool, because you're going to want to enjoy this soup as soon as you blend it. But get yourself a blender and then pour that into the blender along with all those juices. Don't waste any of that because that's all that flavor too that's come off of like the seasoning, the spices, and all of that. It's going to taste delicious. And so you put that in the blender and then add in the little bit of fresh basil. And then we also want to use 2 cloves of fresh garlic. And the last final things once we blend it all up are very simple. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of just plain white vinegar. So that's, again, building up a little bit more of that acidity. You could use any kind of vinegar, honestly, but I just have this always on hand. And then just another little bit of salt. So I think it's about half a teaspoon of salt. But, do it according to your taste. We made a delicious batch already. And so Jose is going to dish out for us so you all can taste it. Like I said, it's a really simple recipe. It comes together fairly quickly. You could do this with any kind of vegetables, honestly. If you like, like we're in fall, right? So anything like butternut squash, think of even carrots, throwing some in there and doing something similar. What you have here is kind of a nice base because onions are always going to be great. Anything you do with them, right? In the oven, roasted, broiled, they always taste delicious. And it's kind of nice too, because we're lucky here that it's still beautiful and sunny. And by the afternoon, we still have decent temperatures. We could grill all of this and that would give it a delicious taste and then just blend it all. What else do you guys think you could do? Sort of taking this simple recipe with these vegetables and fruits that you see here, because technically they're fruits, right? What do you, are there other ideas of what you've made maybe before or anything that you think would be great to add to this?
I would add the garlic cloves.
Like roasted garlic?
Yeah. So
right into there.
you could add, yes, because that would absolutely blend in even more flavor. Once that garlic roasts, it's going to have delicious flavor because it's going to caramelize. Yeah, that would be great. You could put, actually, what I like to do, I'll take my garlic just like so, and then just peel a little bit of this off and kind of cut it apart like that, and you could scatter that in there. That would be, this is one of my favorite. I don't know exactly the name of the type of this garlic. I don't know if you all notice, like it has these beautiful purple and white stripes. This is just regular garlic, bulk garlic at H-E-B. And if you see it, buy it because it has the most beautiful taste. I'm not quite sure where this one comes from, but I don't see it all the time. I do see it, occasionally, but and it's not that expensive, but it is beautiful and it tastes so good and roasted. Perfect. Yeah. Anything else? Or has anyone tried kind of a recipe like this?
I'd add, because I like mine to be a little bit more, I'm not opposed to milk, but I like coconut milk.
Yeah.
I'd add probably coconut milk.
That would be great.
And just to balance that acidity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, coconut milk, and the coconut milk in the can. Or you could do even coconut milk in the carton, but coconut milk in the can, if you've seen it, comes in all these different varieties. There's the light. I tend to go for the full on because it has that little bit of kind of creaminess on top. So that's going to add that creaminess if you can't do dairy. That's missing. It might make it a little bit sweeter too. But this is just a wonderful fall recipe because it is really so simple and you can kind of interchange some of the ingredients in there. Go ahead.
Could you, because I know this is kind of like an Italian, I guess, theme or whatever. So could you like switch like the basil for like cilantro, and then the Italian herbs like for coriander or something
Yeah, absolutely. That would be delicious. Give that a try. I think that would be delicious. Yeah, and what I was going to say actually, which would work really well too, is some kind of spicy pepper. You know, whether a jalapeno for a little bit of heat, or even a poblano, a roasted poblano thrown in there would be delicious. Like, yeah, think about, sometimes we go to the grocery store and we see all these things and we're not sure, oh, what would we do with that? But I often tell people, like, take your favorite recipe and maybe just swap out one ingredient and see what happens. That is sort of the joy I find in cooking. It's like, if you kind of know the profile of the recipe, like we were saying, this is sort of Italian, right? You can find other ingredients that match that. We have like some of these herbs that match it. But yeah, think about that as, I know a lot of times when you're first starting to cook, for those of you who don't cook a lot, sometimes it's a little overwhelming, and so you prefer to just stick with the recipe, right? And that's cool. I love that, because if you have a good recipe, then just keep making that until you feel confident to try something else. But this is one super simple. It's always been my go-to. It's one that is a winner because it's just so simple. And seriously, grilled cheese sandwiches on a day when it's nice and rainy, this is the perfect thing. So it smells delicious. Jose is coming around with the soup cart. Yeah, so even looking at the texture, there's no water added in. It's just all the natural juices from those tomatoes that have been cooked down, and the bell peppers, and some of that little bit of charring that happened as I broiled it under the broiler. But yeah, so have a taste. Let me know what you think.
Delicious.
Yeah, I mean, just the smell of it alone is just like, wow, that's awesome. Yeah, if you have even just you don't need like a fancy blender, just a regular blender, is because everything's nice and sort of soft after you've broiled it. Just be careful again. One thing I did want to mention too, so I've done it on a foil lined pan, but you could also use parchment. I would recommend, if you're going to use parchment, maybe don't broil it, because parchment paper tends to burn at a higher heat. But you could just then roast it if you didn't want to. It would still have the same flavors, maybe without just that charring bit, which I love. But you could do that as well if you don't like using foil.
This tastes delicious. We can add some pasta to this.
Right? Well, and that's a great idea. I mean, you could use this as a base for a pasta sauce. I would add in maybe some diced carrot for a little more sweetness. I would add in a little bit of tomato, tomato paste, just to kind of thicken it. Maybe a little anchovy as well, if you're into that. But yeah, that would also make a great sauce, just kind of starting with that. Great ideas. I love it. Okay, well, while you all are enjoying the soup, I'm going to move us on to a little bit more of the nutrition. I know. I was like, I should have brought bread. I have a friend who is into dehydrating foods, and she went out to a market recently, and there was a vendor who had little dehydrated grilled cheese sandwiches. And she's like, wouldn't that make the cutest crouton for a tomato soup? So I was like, that would be great. I didn't have time to make that, but that's a great idea. So I think this person sells at the Mission Marquee Market when they have their little farmers market. So if you're ever in that neck of the woods on the south end of town, she does all sorts of things that are kind of like freeze-dried foods. Oh, so going back to lycopene. So in case you're not a fan of tomatoes, or maybe you can't have them, there's some other foods that you can find lycopene in. Watermelon, pink grapefruit. Pink grapefruit is one of my favorite things to eat, especially here in South Texas, because so many people have beautiful grapefruit trees, or you can find delicious red grapefruit at H-E-B. Some of the most delicious things. And one of the things that I like to do with it is I'll slice it kind of like an orange, and then I'll arrange it on a platter with a little bit of just plain yogurt and a drizzle of honey and maybe some slivered almonds. And it looks so pretty. But it's beautiful, and it's kind of like dessert for me, but it's super easy if you can tolerate. I know some people with acidic foods, they can't tolerate when they're not feeling great, but it is one of my favorite things to eat, just like that. Okay, so let's see. Anything else? I'm so glad you enjoyed it, and it's a nice chilly morning for soup, isn't it? One thing I also wanted to mention about the garlic. So you all have probably heard the stories of people eating raw garlic for their health, right? My father used to do that for many years because he's like, it's good for my heart. So he would do that. But it is good because it has antibacterial and antiviral properties that help prevent respiratory infections, any kind of, this is the season, right? 'Tis the season for flu, cold, COVID, RSV, you name it, the whole shebang of things that we could possibly get. So definitely any foods like garlic that can help boost our immunity, but also help with our respiratory function is a great thing. It can also help clear. Probably shouldn't say this while you guys are eating, but it is true that it helps to sort of thin the mucus so that you don't have that sort of lingering in your lungs, causing it making it more difficult for you all to breathe and breathe normally. So garlic is a great thing. One of my favorite things to do that I learned when I worked many years in catering is to take a bunch of garlic cloves and simmer them really slowly in just olive oil. And that can be used because it has kind of the same effect as when you're roasting them, but you could use that to spread it on a bagel, on toast, and then add all sorts of other like roasted veggies or something, avocado on there. But it is great. And so I tend to do that every once in a while in the winter. The smell is fantastic, but it's also great health properties, right? Okay, so let me see. Last week we talked about kind of, similar things where we were saying, stick to an anti-inflammatory diet. Same is true for our lung health. So look at foods that are low in sodium, low in sugar, and then those staying away from those unhealthy fats. Typically, finding things more like our avocados, our olive oils, and things like that. Incorporating more of those whole foods like the fruits and vegetables, the whole grains are good to kind of keep us in general strong and healthy. Dark leafy, I read this and I thought it was great. So anything kind of dark leafy greens like kale, spinach, and then fruits such as cherries or berries, they contain phytonutrients. So those are really great at just boosting our immunity. They're basically plant compounds, but they help reduce inflammation and they can contribute to healthy lung function. So always, when you're at the grocery store, see what's out there. They tend to rotate through some seasonal things. There's some really good stuff out there right now. I'm seeing all sorts of beautiful greens. That's always nice to kind of change it up a little bit if you're used to doing salads. Sometimes it's nice to switch in some of these darker leafy greens to add those to your diet. I'm always a fan of berries anytime. Cherries, when you can find them in season, are delicious. But then let's also talk about some of the herbs and spices that are great for lung health. So has anybody here heard of oregano or oregano oil or teas for good lung health? Yeah, yeah, you can make a simple tea just by taking straight dried oregano. Just use a little because it is kind of bitter, but that's also supposed to be supportive for lung health. It's kind of, I love, a lot of cultural influences when it comes to people just naturally, in the past just used herbal remedies to just take care of themselves. And so this is sort of one of those where it's just like, you don't have to take a pill. This is an all natural thing and you can just make a simple tea. You can also purchase like oregano oil capsules. I would recommend if you take those though, because I've done it before, that you take them after you've eaten something because you will have kind of that taste of the oregano, which I love. But it is one of those because it comes in the capsule. So the other thing too is turmeric. So it's similar to ginger, it's a root, and that has great anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. The trick to it though is to pair it with black pepper because that will help increase the absorption rate of the turmeric. And black pepper, it says here, contains, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, piperine. And so the curcumin, which is found in turmeric, is said to be absorbed at much higher rates with that. This is kind of under the nutrition section, but it's sort of like other factors. So if you think about your home, we're there a large part of the day, right? We sleep there, we enjoy time with family there, but there's also things to consider when it comes to your lung health with both indoor and outdoor environment factors. So air quality, Seasonal allergies are a big thing here in San Antonio, all time of the year, all different things, right? And so when you're outside, some of the things that are typically recommended are don't be outside during the peak time, because that's when you'll have more exposure to things that can cause your allergies to flare up. But so go either early in the morning or later in the evening. It's a little trickier now that the time has changed and it gets darker. And then if you're in crowded spaces, maybe you're not a fan of that. So I recommend maybe trying to avoid crowded spaces, or, some people are still comfortable wearing masks in crowded spaces, especially if you're immune compromised. I'd recommend that. Sometimes there's just a lot out there. And so it tends to, filter through, where our lungs are like filters, right? It's kind of filtering in all of that stuff. In addition to that, things inside your home. I had a coworker recently who wanted to rip out all of this brand new carpet that she had just installed because she had heard that there were some things in the carpet that were making her very ill. She was having all sorts of allergic reactions. Her eyes were swelling and just dry, and just, she was very uncomfortable. And the people who came in to remove the carpet said, "It's a brand new carpet. Why don't we just try cleaning it?" Well, then they found out, well, she's got all these pets. And so it's like, you think about all the things that you kind of live with and amongst, and you kind of don't think about it. But if you do, you have to kind of consider, like, yes, carpet tends to trap a lot of debris. If you have pets, any pet dander, people can be really susceptible, and it can change as you age. Maybe you weren't before so sensitive to certain things, but then it changes. Or maybe you had an illness and that you're just more sensitive to those things. So anything like couches, fabrics, curtains, any of that, wash those regularly, dust things regularly, keep the carpets. I tend to be a little more sensitive with carpet, and so I hate to vacuum because it just sort of blows up more stuff. So I like to be in places where there's no carpet. And ceiling fans, that's another one. People just sort of forget about it, right? Because you're not looking up. But if you have a ceiling fan in your house, take a look at it and see how much dust is on there. And if you can, try to make sure that stays clean, because all that stuff is getting blown around, right? And it's accumulating more. So if you can reach up there, or you get one of those cool stick wand kind of cleaners, I recommend doing that as well. Okay, so some of the fun stuff. So we always have recommended activities. These are some that I like to share because not a lot of people have heard about them. Obviously, one of them, this one everybody has heard about, physical activity, right? So if you are able to move during your illness, it is important for lung health to just exercise our lungs. So getting out for a simple walk, going for a stroll, maybe taking, a class that you enjoy, doing something that is just, exercising those lungs. However, if you're compromised and you can't do a lot of physical activity, there's simple things you can do as well. So maybe some chair exercises, some water exercises. One thing I like to do when I've been ill, but I miss being outside because I like to walk a lot, is just going to a park and sitting, because at least I get some of that natural light that helps, keep my dopamine in check, and I don't feel so stifled because I'm not exercising. But I get out, I get the fresh air, I get to people watch. You don't realize how much that contributes to your overall health until you're in a place where you can't do that, and you're like, "Okay, well, I really wish I could just be out." So think of that, and those simpler things that you can do maybe when you're not able to be doing your regular physical activity. The other two things, one of them is sound bathing. Has anybody heard of that before or done it? A couple, okay. I was introduced to this probably about a year ago. I just was looking for activities to do to, just kind of meet people and do something different. And I went to a local, it was kind of like a little gym. And there was a woman there who was offering sound bathing classes in a group. And it's really beautiful. She has all these different like chimes and bowls, and she is a licensed sound bath practitioner. And she does it in a group setting. Her site is Blue Elephant Vibes. Her name is Audrey Stevens. But there are all sorts of people in San Antonio who do sound bathing. She tends to do them in groups, but it's a beautiful way of slowing down the body, and it's very meditative. Some people, she'll have maybe like an hour-long session, and you hear all of this sort of cacophony of sound coming out of all of these instruments that she uses, but it's also sort of very grounding. She may use like infused oils at the beginning to kind of just help you center, but it is a way, just even simply, if you're stressed and you're tired and you need a minute to regroup, I highly recommend doing something like this. There is also a person that I met about a year ago who does one-on-one sound bathing sessions, which are much more intimate, very specific to kind of your needs. And she is at a location called Center for Infinite Transformation. She does some wonderful stuff. I'd never heard about this, but I am all for alternative forms of just healing, because sometimes we need that, right? Like sometimes we get really frustrated with what we're doing or what the doctors are saying, and we just need to take a little break. And anything that just helps us relax our mind and relax our bodies, helps us breathe, again, with the lungs, helps us breathe and slow down is a good thing. So if you're into that kind of thing, I highly recommend checking that out. The last thing on there is something called forest bathing. Has anybody heard that before? No, okay. It's actually, there's a Japanese term for it. I'm probably not going to pronounce this correctly, Shinrin Yoku. But it's basically this therapeutic method that allows you to immerse yourself in the sights, sounds, smells of nature. And you're like, well, isn't that just like being outside and going for a walk? It could be. But people tend to like organize and do these things. I'm not quite sure of who's doing them here. I have spent a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest, and so I am used to just wandering out, hiking in beautiful trees, like tall cedars, and just like having that serenity of just being out there amongst that beautiful nature. That I highly recommend too, because it is just so satisfying. Even if it's not like, I know some people tend to go hiking and they're like, we got to get to the top, we got to see the view. And it's like, just go to enjoy, because there's so many things. And if you go at different times, I'm an early bird, so I always like to get up early and just like tackle the day, but go out there when it's quiet and when you can see like all the animals in nature, deer, birds, all of that. Like it's so relaxing. So I highly recommend. Again, if you can't do any kind of physical activity, this is a great one, because you're still getting out, you're moving around a little bit, but you're also taking care of like yourself, even spiritually. Like sometimes just being in nature is just a great spiritual experience. Okay, last two things I wanted to mention are, we always have kind of recommended reading or listening. Two of my favorite things. So there is a gentleman called James Nestor who wrote the book Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art. This is such a fascinating book. I highly recommend, if you're an audiobook person or however you like to read, check this out. Just the history of kind of how we came to breathe, but also how we're losing that aspect of it and what that's doing to our health. Great read. And then my favorite sort of online yoga person, because I feel like any kind of activity, even if it is something as simple as stretching, is this gal named Adrienne Mishler. She's from Austin, actually, but she's got a great YouTube channel. Everything is free. You can do it in the comfort of your own home. She typically tends to put out a calendar on her website. You just click on that, it takes you to a video. Some of them are very short, they're like 10 minutes. You could do it when you wake up in the morning. She has this cute little dog named Benji, so that's always kind of comforting because he's kind of in the background. He does a little downward dog every once in a while. But she just has a nice way of, making everybody comfortable if you've never done yoga before. But she has it for all sorts of things, which I had never seen until I started following her many years ago. I was going through a rough patch, and I wanted something where I could just slow down. I couldn't do a lot of physical activity, but watching her and doing some of her yoga videos was amazing, because it again helped me kind of regroup, recenter, and just feel stronger in my body after I started doing quite a few of them. But things like that are really important to kind of tune into. If it's your thing, check it out, give it a try. If there are other things, find those things that kind of help keep you centered when you're ill. And a lot of things, especially when it comes to the lungs, are difficult because, if you're not feeling well, maybe you don't have the energy, you physically cannot do it, right? But there are other ways that you can get your movement in during these times. So, any other questions as we wrap up today?
Also, when you're outside, go barefoot so your feet can touch the grass and the ground.
Yeah, did you all hear that? So if you're outside, barefoot. That somebody recommended that to me as well. Even if you don't have like grass or you stepping on a balcony or something, right? Like get outside and take your socks off. Like I was on a walk with a group of women and they did that at a park, and some of them were kind of hesitant, and I was like, no, let's do it. Like there is something about feeling very grounded and doing that in a comfortable space that it does wonders.
You can order grounding mats too.
Oh, okay.
Put in your bed or your chair or under your feet.
Well, there you go. Grounding mats. And look,
Amazon has it.
Amazon has everything, don't they? Anything else? Is there anything that you all kind of tend to do when it comes to sort of this area that works for you? Anything?
Breathing.
Breathing, yeah.
I just breathing and just do my breathing in the morning, at night, anytime, during break, anything like that. Yeah, deep breaths, slow deep breaths without jerks. It's nice.
Yeah, everybody's taking a breath right now, or like, it really does wonders. We often forget about it, right? It's something that's automatically just kind of happening in our body, but the breath is the simplest thing to come to, especially when we're stressed, we're distracted. It just kind of keeps us, we come back to the breath, right? Like they always say that, meditation, anything, yoga, come back to the breath because it will help you recenter. And sometimes, especially when we're going through an illness, like we have a lot of things going on in our mind. Catch yourself next time, because I do this quite a bit too. I'm holding my breath a lot when I'm stressed, and I can feel it here. And you want to make sure that you release that, because it's not a good place to be. It's not comfortable. A lot of us are naturally like that. We go around our days doing that. We don't even realize it. But something as simple as slowing down, taking a deep breath, it's great medicine. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, ladies, for being here today. Hope you enjoyed our recipe. Hope you get to make it at home one of these days. Thanks a lot. All right.